This build was never supposed to be public in the first place, so it's kind of interesting. Yeah, see, setup is. I don't know what setup is wanting to do, but apparently setup is. Okay, that makes sense. That's perfectly normal. And this needs to be 2011. 2011. There we go. Good day, folks. Jordan here. In today's video, we're exploring a very, very interesting piece of software. Since I wanted to document this for quite a while now, I figure it's past due to make a video on it. And that is Windows 8 Build 7850. Now, this was shortly after Windows 7 had come out and Microsoft started development on Windows 8, trying to build on the success that 7 had brought Microsoft. Ever since, of course, they had to rush Windows 7 out the door, considering the huge flop that Windows Vista was, and they wanted to get people off of XP. Well, you know, that's an entire video for another day. But we're going to take a look at Microsoft's, I guess, in quotes, next generation operating system that they wanted to bring to the masses. And it was supposed to be a complete redesign of Windows that rethought how you used a computer. So the whole idea was that Microsoft wanted to make an operating system that was for one OS running on multiple platforms to embrace the touchscreen era. For example, they had started on this with Windows Phone 7, which started a little after this build, actually, give or take, as I think Windows Phone 7 came out around 2010, like late 2010, early 2011, somewhere in there. And this was around the time of Windows 8's development, so it sort of ties together. Anyway, to get on with the video, I'm going to go ahead and open up VMware Fusion and bring the window on over, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so for this operating system, since it's very similar to Windows 7, and in fact it actually has the same Windows NT kernel number of 6.1, we're just going to go ahead and use Windows 7 64-bit for our configuration. And I think we'll just leave it on legacy BIOS, because I think Windows 7 at this current, so Windows 8 in this current state, I just said 7, I'm an idiot, does not have support for the, whatever the acronym is. It's in a caption down below. Anyway, we're going to go and customize settings. We want to call this Windows 8 Build 7850. And just watch, it's going to, oh, it actually showed up on the right screen this time. So let's go ahead and configure it for 2 CPUs, and we'll give it 3 gigabytes of RAM. And I think for this one, we need to go into isolation. I think, no, well, that's not the setting I was thinking of. I was thinking of advanced, there we go. So we do not want to synchronize time. I made the mistake of doing that another time. I was experimenting with this build, and it would just throw up an error. And you don't want that, because you usually on these you want to set a specific date that's usually known as the BIOS date on these builds, and that way it will be in the realm of the time bomb that is hard-coded into the operating system by Microsoft. I usually enable hard disk buffering because it just makes the installation much faster, and then I think everything else will be just fine. Since I'm not running this on the laptop, I don't need to worry about passing the power status over. And I believe that's about it, because I'm not going to worry about anything else, because I think the Windows 7 stuff will just work on this operating system. So with that having been taken care of, we want to power on to firmware. We do not want to power it on right away and start installing, because technically you can do that, but you don't want to do that. And here's why. So let's go ahead and pop this into full screen, and we'll change the date, because we want to change it to September. Whoops, my numlock's not on. That might be useful if it was on. We need to change it to the 23rd of September. This BIOS is kind of confusing to work with. And this needs to be 2011. 2011. There we go. Time doesn't matter. And I think everything else we can pretty much just leave as it is, because I don't think we need to really worry about this because this is not a DOS operating system. And I think everything else will pretty much just be alright as it is. So let's go ahead and set the boot priority for the CD-ROM drive to be first, and exit and boot it up. Now, one thing that's going to stand out right away, there's nothing different on the boot screen about this operating system. There's absolutely nothing different. And the reason why is because really this build only has under the hood changes to the main operating system itself. There's like nothing different otherwise when it comes to this. Now there is a bug when it comes to the setup, and I believe this was noted, that you just get a black background initially with the classic Windows 7 setup screen that has not been changed. But as soon as you press install now, the background that's currently inside of this window here will come back, but you get a nice typo, I think. I think this is the part where you get a typo, but this build was never supposed to be public in the first place, so it's kind of interesting. Yeah, see, setup is. I don't know what setup is wanting to do, but apparently setup is. Okay, that makes sense. That's perfectly normal. Now, one thing that's new is you're required to put in your product key for activation before you can continue with the installation. And this was to help prevent software piracy, because this was a trend that started in Windows 8, and it thankfully is no longer a trend that continues on because Windows 10 has the whole digital certificate way of licensing Windows nowadays. So I guess it's not really that big of a deal. But anyway, this was the first build, at least the first leaked build of Windows 8 that we know of, which included this from the get-go. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and show you, because this button here was implemented early for touchscreen keyboards. However, it's broken. It doesn't do anything. The on-screen keyboard in Windows setup came much later when Windows 8 finally came out. One weird thing is that this was not in this activation thing was not in the developer preview version of Windows 8, and I think that was because the product key was hard-coded in, and Windows 8 developer preview was released at the time of the build conference of 2011, so there really was no need to have product activation per se, because it was all one key that was publicly available, so there's no sense in doing that. However, this one is a Microsoft confidential build, and which you actually need to have a product key in order to be able to install this operating system. Fortunately, we do have some, and I will go ahead and start putting it in. Now, I believe this is based on Windows 7 Ultimate. However, you can put in whatever key you'd like. However, I'm going to put in the Ultimate key because it's available to me, and I'll just leave it in the video because anybody can really download this, and anybody can really try this out, so there's no sense in me censoring the product key. Unless, of course, my video gets taken down, but I highly doubt that. So anyway, let me go ahead and start typing in the product key, quit my blabbing, and we'll continue. So this is what you want to enter if you're wanting to install the Ultimate Edition of this particular build of Windows 8. So now we'll go ahead and press Next. I assume that it's going to work. If not, I have other keys that I can try. It did work that time. Interestingly, it references itself as Windows 8, even though some other people who actually downloaded this build when it was initially leaked had a slightly different license agreement. Although I don't know if this ISO has been modified ever since the build itself was leaked a long time ago, or if this is actually what it was supposed to be. But anyway, it looks as if it's just a traditional Microsoft pre-release version of Windows license thing for... I think this is literally the exact same thing that came with Windows 8 developer preview as far as I know. Like I said, I don't know if this was supposed to be intentionally different because it was a Microsoft confidential build, or if this was just modified later, whatever, because, it's supposed to be a lot less text in here, but who knows. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to installing, because I don't exactly have a surplus of time to be wasting here, because, of course, I'm having you guys watch this video. So anyway, let me show you an Easter egg. I think it might show up here inside of the setup process. If I go Shift F10, there you can see it's build 7850 in the command prompt. If I go into, say, Task Manager here, for example, here you can see the Task Manager looks exactly the same because this is literally just Windows 7 setup. However, I think if we go to About Task Manager, okay, it does not show up quite yet, but you can see there's an Easter egg of Windows 8 Milestone 1, which is definitely what this is a Milestone 1 build. It is compiled for 64-bit, and I think WinMain stands for the lab of which this was being developed in at Microsoft's campus. I think there were multiple different labs at Microsoft that were developing this operating system, and I think WinMain is the one that got leaked, although I don't know if there were any other versions of the same exact version of Windows that got leaked around the same time or later or whatever, but at least this one in particular is WinMain. Of course,
unauthorized use or disclosure in any manner may result in disciplinary action up to and including termination of employment in the case of employees, termination of an assignment or contract in the case of contingent staff, and potential civil and criminal liability.
And of course, this is licensed to Microsoft of Microsoft, because of course, it's Microsoft. But there's really nothing else interesting to see here inside of the command prompt. I think there's nothing else you can really launch in here because, of course, it's not installed yet, although we can install Notepad or open Notepad, but again, it's going to be the same exact thing. I think it's in later builds, if not when it's actually installed, that you get a little Microsoft Confidential thing inside of the About panels, but at least in this pre-setup thingy-mabobber, I don't think that shows up. So anyway, this setup process, unless there's anything else that is noteworthy about it, is exactly the same thing as Windows 7. So there's really no point in me recording, so I'm just going to go ahead and turn the screen recording off, and I will be back once we are set up. And that does include VMware Tools, by the way, because I know VMware Tools does take quite a while to install, so I'm not going to put that into this video. One little tidbit that I should mention before we get into the operating system, and I'm just doing this in post because, oops, turn off the network adapter. So I did say that I was going to come back after the setup of VMware Tools, but I did remember that there are some things in the setup that are slightly different from Windows 7, and let's just go ahead and get into those right now. So the first of which is that the text up here is a little bigger, and it's in Segoe UI Lite than it is in the standard Windows 7 setup. If you know what I mean, they do look slightly different. Also, on this one, you are supposed to type in your username at this screen, which is interesting that they put it on this screen. Okay, so that's about it. Just those two things. It's really interesting. Okay, we are back here in Windows 8 build 7850, and we have all the drivers installed. Now, one thing I will say before I actually get into the nitty-gritty about this OS is many people might ask me, how do you get VMware Tools installed on a beta version of Windows? Well, it's actually fairly simple. What you want to do is you pay attention to the kernel version number. And what I mean by this is when you go into something like WinVer and look at the version number, you can see version 6.1. Now, that correlates to Windows 7 more than it does to Windows 8, despite the fact that it is clearly labeled inside of this string as Windows 8 Milestone 1. But that's just because the version identifier that they're using has not been changed yet to represent the new kernel version, as it is so similar to Windows 7 still that it really doesn't matter, because there's not enough under the hood changes to constitute a new kernel number. So that's why it still says version 6.1, which is why you can still install VMware Tools as Windows 7, because the kernel version number hasn't changed. Now, I can see why that would be a bit of a difficulty in, say, maybe Windows 95 builds, or Windows 98 builds, or Windows 2000 builds, or whatever. Like, you know, I can see why there would be such a drastic change in those, of which VMware Tools is not going to install properly, but that's another video for another day. I might experiment with that later if I feel the need to, if there's enough interest in the comment section, and you know, maybe that might be something I could expand upon. But at least in these more modern builds, this isn't really an issue. It's just that people don't know about that. But anyway, moving on. As you can see, I have Arrow working, which works just fine. It's a little slow because I'm virtualizing Windows, but that's okay. Now, there's something cool about the user interface that I want to explore here in a little bit, but not right at the moment, since, you know, I want to get into the basic stuff. Now, obviously, there's something new in the taskbar, and that is this little profile picture. Now, this was eventually used in Windows 8, but this is like the earliest form of it that I can even think about referencing to. Now, if you know about Windows 8 having in the start screen, this is what I'm referring to, is in the start screen, the little user tile in the upper right hand corner. This is this menu. This thing right here is that little menu, except it has more options for my settings and my look, although I don't know what the heck is with my look. We'll take a look at that here real quick. Oh, okay, so I just changed your profile picture, which was also inside of Windows 8. How about my settings? What does that do? Okay, it just changes your user account stuff. This would take you to the change your password screen in Windows 8. And I think lock PC was not, or no. Yeah, all three options and all that stuff, minus the My Look thing probably, was in Windows 8 Final. But it was not down here in the taskbar ever. Until technically the Windows 10 Fall Creators Update, where you got that silly little taskbar people button, although that's totally not the thing I'm talking about. But that's beside the point. So there's nothing really interesting that I can really see out of the blue, other than the new Internet Explorer icon, which we'll take a look at that next. This does come with a beta version of Internet Explorer 9, and this is the earliest known build of that web browser. As you can see, it looks very similar, but it's also got an inconsistent set of logos. As you can see, this uses the Internet Explorer 8 logo in this dialog box, whereas this uses the Internet Explorer 9 logo in that dialog box there. But really, it's so early to tell that you really don't care too much. This also was the, I think this is the second or third, no, not third, the first or second version of Internet Explorer that really integrated the arrow interface more properly. I think Windows Internet Explorer 8 was the first one that, kind of did this. And Vista sort of had the same thing, but not quite, because of course Vista's display theme was a little different. And of course XP's was opaque. But I think this was the very first one that really integrated every bit of the interface together. There's this thing that says move, stop, and refresh. What does it do? Oh, it just puts them over onto the left. Okay, that's interesting. One thing that I've noticed is that there's no two rows like there was in the final version of Internet Explorer 9. Although that's really not a bad thing to say, because of course the interface is clean, and I really do think it looks nice for what it was, what they were trying to pull off back then. And if we want to take a look at the build number, you can see it's Internet Explorer 9.0.7850, and it's in beta update versions. And it basically is going to browse exactly the same as Internet Explorer 8. But anyway, there's still a 64-bit edition of Internet Explorer in this version of Windows. I think Internet Explorer 9 was the last Internet Explorer version to keep the 64-bit. I might be wrong. It could have been Internet Explorer 8, but it doesn't really matter. Apparently we've got two startup folders. One is intercapitalized. I don't know what the difference is between the two, but I guess there's just some inconsistency there in the start menu. But everything else is essentially exactly the same as Windows 7, except the administrative tools are empty, and I don't know why that is, because this is Windows 8 Ultimate. And this does come with both PowerShell and PowerShell ISE in their 32-bit and 64-bit flavors. Yeah, basically everything else is exactly the same as Windows 7. So there's nothing really different here. But there are a few hidden things of which I'd like to show in this video that were very early. There's one that is for the window color and appearance, but we'll get onto that here in just a second once I start to copy over some things from my Mac. For example, we need to make a few registry keys sorts of things. We just need to make a new text document. One interface element that is new is the centered title bars, which Windows 8 was the one and only that is more modern that actually implemented the centered titles, just like Mac. The only other versions of Windows that I can think of that actually had that were Windows 1.0 through NT 3.51. Those were the only versions of pre-NT Windows, well, technically that, although Windows NT had the same exact interface as 3.1, which is what I'm referring to. But anything from 1.0 through 3.11 or 3.51, if you're on the NT side of things, had the center titles. And this, that was until this, which of course then they put it back in the center. But nowadays in Windows 10, they put it back in the top left, so it kind of makes sense, I guess. I don't know. Alright, so now it's time to take a look at some quote-unquote fixes, or what I would like to call Easter eggs. So the first thing that we can take a look at is auto-colorization of the interface based on your wallpaper, which was a feature that was introduced in Windows 8 when it first came out, and is still a feature found in Windows today, although it's much more, I guess, complex. But you can actually enable it in this version of Windows 8 in its early form. So basically what we need to do is we need to go to Windows Resources Themes, and I've already done this, but I'm just going to show it off for people who are looking to do this. So what you want to do is you want to take the arrow.theme file and you want to drag it to your desktop, although it's going to ask you to do it first, although I just tried to move it to the desktop, not make a copy of it, but you just make a copy of it to the desktop. What you want to do is you would rename this to arrow_auto, which is what's shown over here inside of this .theme file. And then what you do is you would open it up in Notepad, and underneath Visual Styles, you would add a string known as auto colorization equals 1. You would then save it, put it back into the C Windows Resources Themes directory. You would then go to your Personalize and re-enable this theme, which would be under Installed Themes. And it has this fancy icon on it. And it's not very fancy, I guess you could say, but what it does is it allows the background color, the theme color to change based on the background. And I don't have a lot of pictures of which I can demonstrate this with, so I'm going to have to copy some over, but I do have a couple, so give me just 1 second. Alright, just get some wallpapers on here. I don't really care what they are at this moment in time. We're just going to go ahead and give them a go. And now, let's go ahead and set a desktop wallpaper. Actually, we'll just do it from the Windows Explorer. And we'll see if the color changes automatically. As you can see, I can't set a wallpaper other than the default one. But as you can see, the theme color is indeed changing based on the wallpaper to some degree, although it's not letting me set a background, which is very annoying, probably because, of course, it set the correct date and time. For whatever reason, it just decided it wanted to do that, so you gotta watch out when it comes to these more modern versions of Windows, but it kind of proves my point that yes, indeed, you can indeed have the theme color change, although now, of course, there's the background. This is the only background that'll show up because, of course, this is a Microsoft Confidential build. Another thing that I've hinted here on the desktop is the pdf.reg registry extension. So what you can do is you can make this .reg file with this string in it, and you save it as a .reg file, you put it into the registry, and then what you want to do is you want to disable arrow. Now, you can only disable it and then not have any other themes until you reboot. So if I'm going to do it now, I'm going to do it now. So what you want to do is you want to press Control, Shift, and then F9, and that will disable the arrow theme entirely until you reboot. And now we can go ahead and go into Run, and we can go to Windows, System 32, and then run this application known as glcnd.exe. And when you do, we get this sort of reader application. Now my guess is that this is for reading PDF files. Now, I don't know if there's any kind of PDFs on the system, but at least I thought I would at least show the program as it is, so that way you can see what it is. So now let's go ahead and take a look at another one. So now we're going to take a look at the new Windows Task Manager. Now, if you open the Task Manager as it is, shut up about genuine software licensing, you'll notice that this uses the older style of Task Manager. Nothing fancy about it, but it does work just fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to not open the Start menu because I'm used to doing Command for my Control C and V. I got to remember that this is Windows. So we want to put in this string. We want to save as, and then we're going to just save it as taskman.reg as an all files document. And then we can leave this Task Manager open. It's not going to change anything really. We then add this to the registry. And now we go to C Windows System 32, and then we run taskui.exe. And this will give us our modern Windows Task Manager, and it is named as appropriately as such, Windows Task Manager, Modern Windows Task Manager. And this will have been the Task Manager replacement of Windows 8, and this will show you a much more user-friendly way of showing the Windows processes and applications that are running. So as you can see, idle and whatnot, you can close them with this big X button. You can modify what starts on startup. You can log off what users are logged on and see what they're running on their own user. Although I'm not sure if it was this complex when it came to Windows 8 when it first came out. I think so, but I cannot recall, and I'm not going to, of course, do anything about it. But you can obviously do your new task things here. They didn't forget that. So overall, this was a step in the right direction when it comes to the Task Manager. Of course, these buttons down here are broken. They don't do anything, and they also do not update. So, yeah, it's just a static icon there. So let's take a look at another one. This is the Ribbon UI. And the Ribbon UI was new for Windows 8, which replaced the classic Windows Explorer with a new interface. So let's go ahead and we'll save as, and that will be explorer.reg, because we can do that. So we'll save that to the desktop. Now this won't exactly like replace the Explorer, but it'll kind of update it. So now we need to go into the task manager, end explorer.exe, and then relaunch it. And then when we open up the File Explorer, here is the new user interface. Now it's slightly broken, as you can obviously tell. There's a bunch of things that are not yet implemented, but you can get the gist of it. This is basically the user interface from Office 2007 and Office 2010 that spawned into the Windows Explorer. And of course, this was how the user interface was in Windows 8, although obviously it was much more complete. It didn't have circle icons for all the buttons, including these buttons up here. And yes, I believe those are the undo and redo buttons up there, or something like that. But this does give you different options. For example, if you click on a hard drive, you can get all the options up here for formatting, cleaning up, defragmenting, so on and so forth, although they're not implemented yet, as you can clearly see. There is an eject button, and that does work. To my knowledge, it does. Let's see if it does eject. Yes, it does eject. Mounting the network drives, so on and so forth. Basically the exact same thing as a Windows 7's Explorer, but it had a lot more options up here for more tablet-friendly accessing, I guess you could say. And I don't know if it applies for any other Windows. I think that's it. And lastly, we're going to take a look at a new sort of webcam capturing application. And I don't know if it's going to work with the webcam in my iMac. I'm pretty sure it will, because VMware does install the webcam driver. But let's try it and see if it works. And I keep hitting Command, not Control. That's going to be a theme of these videos, I suppose. So we're going to go ahead and make it as webcam.reg. And we're going to go ahead and open it up and see what it does. So obviously, first things first, we need to run the registry key. And then we can go to Run and open C Windows System 32. And we need to run webcam.exe. And here we are. Now, my webcam, as you can see, is working, and it looks like absolute garbage because, of course, this application is not really optimized, and you can see all the junk on my bed, so my apologies for that. But as you can see, we have options for starting or stopping a video capture, taking a photo without any delay, take a photo after a short delay, and a few settings. And I think these links down here, well, the settings one definitely does not work. That has not been implemented yet. But the View Saved Captures does indeed work, and it has a folder specific to that in the Explorer. My guess is that this was the camera application in Windows 8, and this was just a very early application for that. Essentially what this is doing like a Windows XP sort of thing, in that it's doing a very low resolution preview of the capture device to show you that it's working. However, it doesn't let you take any photos or video with it because it's not in another application. This is just a preview window. So let's go ahead and see if we can take a picture here. Aha! It did take a picture. What's the quality like? I don't know. Let's find out. Oh god, it is very low resolution, but as you can see, it does work. It did take a picture. So let's go ahead and see if we can record a video. Now, there's no way to exit this application other than to hit Alt F4, so yeah. Otherwise, I think that's about it when it comes to Windows 8 build 7850. It's definitely a step in the right direction when it comes to running more into the lines of modern Windows. It's still Windows 7 at heart, and it will probably still be just fine to run all your Windows 7 applications on nowadays. But the problem is you're not going to get any security updates because, of course, even if I go up here and enable the networking, because, of course, it's kind of redundant at this point that I don't because it's already set the date and time. Also, that networking icon is slightly different because if there's a network error, it just replaces the entire network icon instead of being itty-bitty teeny tiny. And also, one user interface element quirk that I have not mentioned is that the buttons are in the 125% text scaling instead of 100% by default. Although, I think that was because the buttons in Windows 8 had a slight different look to them, and so, of course, the button sizes had to be a little bigger. Although I'm going to verify that real quick while it does its thing. So if I go to Custom Text DPI, you can see it's 100%, but it uses Windows XP style DPI scaling out of the box, unless of course I think you do something else. I'm not entirely sure. This one does not use Windows XP style DPI scaling. Windows 8 had a more fine-grained control as to how big the text size was per elements of the display to try and implement for the tablet touchscreen display and how small the text could be and so on and so forth. This is not doing anything, so I'm going to just not worry about it. I think Windows Update looks exactly the same. Yes, it does. I don't think that you can get updates for this version of Windows because it's an internal build, and it's also not a Windows 7 build 7600 thing or Windows build 7601, so it's just going to give you an error. So that's obviously not surprising that that doesn't work. But I think everything else is exactly the same as Windows 7. There's literally probably no difference between it. I don't think you even get any sample music, but I'm not sure. Apparently this is now called Bing, so, oh, there is sample music. Okay, it's just the Windows 7 sample music, but I wonder what this Bing button does. We regret to inform you that Microsoft has retired the online media service listing program. You can still use stores that you've saved to Windows Media Player under online stores, but you won't be able to browse other unsaved online stores. Get a list of online stores by searching in Bing on your browser. Hence why there's a Bing button now, because of course they have retired the program because basically nobody uses Windows Media Player anymore, which is not surprising. Although I don't know what devices you can actually sync to this. I'm pretty sure I'd have to experiment with that. Maybe like an old Zune if anybody still has a Zune. But anyway, that's it for this video of Windows 8 build 7850. Apparently that goes blank when it plays the log off sound. That's kind of interesting. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next video.